You truly don't create photographs by yourself, as everyone is aware. And I agree to this tonight on behalf of my friends, who have a big impact on this film and my life. My existence consists of driving up and down when I'm at home and playing volleyball. Up until recently, no one was aware of how chaotic Kevin Costner's love life was. For years, the Oscar winner concealed a covert affair. For 6 solid years, he refused to recognize that he was the father of the child. Rumors circulated about married ladies, co-stars, and even a hula dancer. However, something changed, following 2 costly divorces that cost him more than $140 million. At the age of 70, Costner finally acknowledged his own romantic desires. And everyone who knows him has been stunned by the woman he has chosen. Nobody anticipated this Hollywood conclusion. On January 18, 1955, Kevin Costner was born in Linwood, California. Although one of his brothers had passed away at birth in 1953, he was the youngest of 3 boys. Sharon, his mother, was a welfare worker. William, his father, was an electrician before becoming a utility executive. The family was middle class and had nothing to do with entertainment. German, English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and Cherokee origins were all mixed together in their background. Because to his father's employment with Southern California Edison, his family relocated frequently. Kevin had gone to over a dozen schools in places like Garden Grove, Ventura, and Visalia. By the time he finished high school, he claimed that being the new child and never being able to establish roots was similar to being in the military. This frequent moving taught him how to adjust, but it also made it difficult for him to make friends and temporarily undermined his confidence. He started to romanticize the concept of home, a topic that would reappear in his films years later. He felt like he had something to prove and a silent need to fit in after all that shifting. Kevin put all of his efforts into sports in high school. He participated in football, basketball, and baseball. Even though he played with Dennis Burt, a future major league pitcher, he was just 5'2" when he graduated, and a shoulder injury dashed his hopes of becoming a professional elite. He had to quit playing sports as a result of that injury. Nevertheless, he carried the discipline he had learnt with him. Years later, he acknowledged that his approach to acting and directing was shaped by those early mornings and team exercises. His affinity for athletics never truly diminished. It developed into a significant aspect of who he was and would subsequently appear in some of his most well-known parts, such as Field of Dreams. He started studying business at Cal State Fullerton in 1973. He participated in intramural football and joined the Delta Chi fraternity. He was viewed by most as an ordinary man rather than an actor. Cindy Silva, his undergraduate girlfriend, had a significant role in his life. Following their graduation, they were married in 1978. Kevin began slipping off to acting classes at night, but no one knew about it. Even Cindy was unaware that he was going to classes 5 evenings a week by his senior year. His appearance at a charity function in a Smokey Okie the Bear costume was the only indication that he was interested in performing. Close pals admitted that they were unaware of his desire to act. Kevin and Cindy took a flight to Mexico for their honeymoon shortly after their 1978 wedding. Something odd occurred on the return flight. Actor Richard Burton, who had purchased the adjacent seats for seclusion, was seated close to them. Despite his nervousness, Kevin chose to hold off until Burton had completed reading his book. Then he sought guidance. "You have green eyes," Burton said. "My eyes are green. I believe you'll be all right." Later, Burton's limousine arrived while they were waiting for a bus. "Good luck," was all he murmured as he rolled down the window. It was a memorable moment. After only 30 days, Kevin left his marketing position to focus entirely on acting. The initial years were far from glitzy. Whatever work he could find, Kevin took on. He was a truck driver, a construction worker, and a fishing boat crew member. He even toured the residences of movie stars. He continued attending auditions throughout the day and took acting workshops at night. The majority of those auditions ended in failure. He was repeatedly turned down. Even in times of financial hardship, Cindy continued to have faith in him. He developed a toughness and a sense of humility during that time that lasted a lifetime. In 1978 or 1979, he starred in his debut motion picture, Sizzle Beach USA, a low-budget sex comedy. He only made $1,800. It wasn't until 1986 that the movie was released. Following his rise to fame, one of the sequences made Kevin so uncomfortable that he later attempted to purchase the movie's rights in order to bury it. The offer was turned down. The film turned into a humiliating incident that served as a reminder of the lengths he had to go to in order to gain recognition. The Big Chill, released in 1983, was one of his first hopes. He was chosen to play Alex, the deceased companion whose suicide unifies the narrative. He believed that filming multiple flashback scenes would be his big break. However, none of his scenes appeared in the final version of the film. A picture of his hands in the casket was all that was left. He was crushed by it. His role was totally removed. Shocking, even other cast members like Glenn Close and Jeff Goldblum. He began to doubt everything after that. He started to question whether he ought to give up. Kevin was prepared to permanently give up acting by the end of 1983. He began submitting applications for business positions. It was time to go on, he decided. However, Cindy took over once more. She advised him to wait another year. It was that year that changed everything. He persisted a bit longer, and it was successful. He tried out for the main part in The Untouchables in 1987. He faced off against 200 other performers, such as Tom Cruise and Mel Gibson. Don Johnson was the director's first choice, but Kevin earned the role after he had the finest screen test. Everything changed because of the movie. On a $25 million budget, the film made $16.2 million globally. For the role Costner received, $1 million, which was a significant sum for someone who was still considered a rising star. He appeared on film alongside Sean Connery and Robert De Niro, with Connery serving as his tutor. Later on, Costner said that he felt uneasy working next to De Niro. He had support from Connery throughout it all, including guidance on how to handle unexpected celebrity. Their relationship was evident on screen, particularly in the well-known hospital and morgue scene. For the part, Connery received an Oscar. Costner left with practical advice in addition to expertise. Costner took the biggest risk of his career just 3 years later. He made the decision to star, produce, and direct Dances with Wolves at the age of 35. Most people believed it would fail. Even some studio executives made fun of it, referring to it as Kevin's Gate, a sarcastic joke based on a previous box office failure. The movie featured lengthy sequences in the Lakota language, untamed creatures, and 27 isolated South Dakota locations. The script was nearly non-existent as well. It originated with Michael Blake, a friend who was unemployed and kept bringing up the subject to Costner until he finally agreed to read it. There was a lot of pressure. Costner made a terrible first shot and thought about keeping it to save face, but the subsequent attempt was a spectacular triumph. Dancing with Wolves was more than just a success. It became a wreck in Hollywood. People were still in the dark when the 1991 Oscars rolled around. Dances with Wolves, however, went on to win 7 Academy Awards. Costner won both Best Picture and Best Director. Since 1931, it was the first Western to win Best Picture. The winner of Best Screenplay was Michael Blake, who had been on the verge of homelessness. Costner accomplished something that few people do in their lifetime at the age of 35. The movie received 12 nominations. Only 6 people have ever won Best Director for a debut, including him. There was no question about his status in Hollywood anymore. In 1991, he maintained the momentum with Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. The movie felt flat, and critics made fun of his accent. However, it generated $25.6 million in its first weekend of release, which at the time was the 8th opening. It eventually made $390 million worldwide. Bryan Adams' theme song became an international sensation and helped to keep the film in the spotlight. The accent may have made people giggle, but ticket sales were honest. Costner produced another hit film. The Bodyguard followed in 1992. In her acting debut, it matched Costner opposite Whitney Houston. With a global box office total of $410.9 million, the picture became the second most grossing film of the year. However, the soundtrack was the one that made all the difference. Records were broken by Whitney's rendition of I Will Always Love You. In a single week, 831,000 copies of the record were sold. In the end, more than 45 million copies were sold. As a result, it became the biggest album of the decade, the best-selling soundtrack ever, and the best-selling record by a woman. Now, Costner was more than just a movie star. He represented a time period. Costner reached the height of his fame in 1995. Waterworld brought in $50 million for him. At the time, that figure was unprecedented. It was more than simply the salary, though. He made almost all of the decisions and invested $22 million of his own funds. He disagreed with Kevin Reynolds, the director, and overruled the studio on a number of issues. Costner occasionally even served as the scene's director. It was uncommon to have that level of control, and it demonstrated how untouchable he had grown. But there was risk associated with all that control. Waterworld became a production calamity. The $100 million initial budget skyrocketed to $175 million. The set was devastated by a cyclone. There were numerous delays. They sank the floating set. Originally scheduled to take 96 days, the shoot ended up lasting more than 150. The press seized upon it. People began referring to it as Kevin's Gate. Costner had to complete the movie by himself after Reynolds left the project. Although there was criticism when the film was first released, it did eventually make money through home and international video sales. It was viewed by the media as the pinnacle of Hollywood conceit. Costner's tendency to assume charge wasn't unique. To Waterworld, he had a reputation for altering texts on numerous settings to strengthen his own part. Actors, writers, and directors became irritated. He wanted everything done his way, and in several takes, on Yellowstone, he even removed scenes involving other actors. According to reports, years later, he modified the schedule to suit his requirements, even if doing so caused inconvenience to others. Working with him meant sacrificing creative independence for many. His name became associated with strength, arrogance, and perfectionism. In 1992, Costner founded his own business, TIG Productions, to further consolidate his power. He gave it his grandmother's name. He created Dances with Wolves, Wyatt Earp, Waterworld, The Postman, and The Bodyguard via TIG. The budgets continued to increase, runtimes increased, his stamp was in every detail. While some movies did well, others did not. However, TIG permitted Costner to establish his own business. After winning Oscars, Kevin Costner had to beg for funding to complete his projects. Although the slide wasn't abrupt, it continued after it got going. It started after he experienced 3 consecutive big setbacks in the mid-1990s. Waterworld debuted in 1995. The original budget of $100 million was blown out to $175 million due to hurricanes, deep sunsets, and interminable delays. Despite earning $264 million globally, it was nonetheless viewed as a failure due to its extravagant budget. Tin Cup opened quietly a year later. It didn't live up to the hype, although it did make some money. The Postman, which occurred in 1997, was the actual catastrophe. Costner co-wrote, produced, starred, and directed it. Only $27 million of the $80 million spent was recovered. It didn't simply fall short. What remained of his golden image was ruined, and it turned into a farce that won the Razzie Awards. Hollywood quickly turned against him. He was fired by Creative Artists Agency in October 1995. Losing them indicated that the industry had stopped taking chances on him because they were his elite representation. He was making close to $20 million every film. However, that was no longer relevant. He insisted on having complete authority in large budgets, which led to losses. Even Castle Rock Entertainment, with whom he had a contract, left early. Costner went from being one of the most influential celebrities in the world to someone the studios didn't want to work with in less than 3 years. Then things became worse. In many nations, his films weren't even showing in theaters until the early 2000s. Even with Kurt Russell and Courtney Cox, 3,000 Miles to Grace moved straight to video in a few spots. Despite costing $60 million to produce, Dragonfly only made $52.3 million. It vanished in silence. By that time, Costner was no longer evaluated based on box office performance or reviews. Failure was just associated with his name. He went from winning Oscars to late-night cable reruns. But he persisted, despite everything. Even after becoming well known for Dances with Wolves, he continued to believe in large Western epics. However, no one was willing to finance him. He was not trusted by the studios. In this way, the American saga Horizon became a personal wager. He acknowledged in 2024 that he approached every potential investor in KN to get assistance. He invested $38 million of his own funds toward the movie as if that wasn't enough. He even put his house in Santa Barbara under mortgage. The man who previously controlled Hollywood was now putting everything on the line to complete a film. His personal life also fell apart at the same time. He spent almost $80 million on his divorce from Cindy Silva in 2004. After 16 years of marriage, they had 3 children. He was having trouble finding sponsors and lost millions on his pictures at the time of that deal. He almost went bankrupt after that financial setback. Despite the fact that divorce documents were confidential, nearly all reports claimed that the compensation was among the largest in Hollywood history. It arrived just when he needed it and drove him to the verge of insolvency. Family issues weren't limited to that. He and Bridget Rooney had a covert connection in the middle of the 1990s. She was descended from the Pittsburgh Steelers owners. She became pregnant after they had an affair.